Every quarter, capital allocators demand a clear line of sight into the future. They want definitive answers on market demand, inflation, and yield. But the global financial system evolves through nonlinear interactions. Between geopolitical friction, supply chain disruption, and rapid technological turnover, applying a single deterministic outcome guarantees forecasting failure. Modern forecasting focuses on building an adaptive intelligence architecture that quantifies multidimensional uncertainty across a range of possibilities. Here lies a critical breakdown in corporate strategy. We possess the computational power to run thousands of probabilistic simulations, yet we routinely translate those sophisticated outputs into rigid, absolute language. To map multiple possible futures, analysts rely on a structural framework known as the cone of plausibility. It acts as a geographic map for diverging scenarios. But mapping the data is only half the equation. The other half is epistemic modality, the precise selection of linguistic markers, verbs, adverbs, and modifiers, used to convey the exact mathematical confidence behind those models. Achieving strategic resilience requires an organization to calibrate its statistical probability with its linguistic assertiveness to prevent catastrophic miscalculation. Traditional financial forecasting relies heavily on fixed assumptions, analysts plugging stable discount rates, market demand, and predefined growth trajectories to generate a singular projection. This animated diagram illustrates the flaw, a single linear projection extending forward. It treats uncertainty as a minor deviation rather than a defining characteristic of the market. When an unexpected data point hits this line, the entire model shatters. These structural disruptions, shocks like sudden inflation, geopolitical shifts, or pandemic-related instability, destroy the logic of static models. During periods of rapid structural change, historical data and embedded assumptions these models rely on become instantly obsolete, rendering their mathematical precision useless. Yet organizations cling to them. A clean, single-point forecast caters to institutional optimism. It offers decision-makers the psychological comfort of perceived certainty, shielding them from the discomfort of ambiguity. Promising certainty in a volatile, multidimensional environment makes these rigid projections create extreme strategic fragility. This structural fragility is compounded by human behavior. The failure of forecasting is tightly linked to the professional incentives governing the analysts themselves. Look at this probability distribution. The broad curve represents a forecaster's honest calculation, but in practice, we see this secondary, spiked distribution emerge. This is reputational cheap talk, a game theory dynamic where forecasters intentionally hedge their predictions toward a safe consensus to protect their careers. This conservative deviation systematically suppresses vital outlier data. By shading their true estimates toward the mean, analysts create an artificially narrow, sanitized view of the future. Then we see the opposite extreme, the forecasting contest. Analysts issue highly aggressive, outlier predictions specifically designed to win attention in a crowded market. To stand out, these contestants adopt extreme linguistic assertiveness. They rely heavily on will statements to artificially project maximum confidence. Neither approach reflects reality. Both the timid consensus and the aggressive outlier fail to convey the true statistical expectation of the underlying data. When organizations consume strategic forecasts at face value, ignoring the hidden economic incentives of the analysts, the resulting market intelligence becomes distorted. To survive this distortion, organizations must replace single outcome projections with scenario-based modeling. This begins with steep analysis, tracking social, technological, economic, environmental, and political variables. These inputs provide the raw material required to map modern complexity. This diagram illustrates how we plot these variables over time. As we move from the present toward the horizon, the geometric highway widens into the cone of plausibility, organizing our data into distinct paths. The central lane is the baseline. This represents the highest density probability, the environment where current macroeconomic trends simply continue uninterrupted.
Expanding outward are the alternative lanes. These represent plausible transformations or new market equilibriums, usually triggered by weak signals we can detect today. At the extreme outer edges lie the wildcards, or black swans. These represent low probability but high impact events. A specific danger here is the Type 2 wildcard, an event with high mathematical probability but low institutional credibility. Things like sudden climate infrastructure failures or rapid technological obsolescence. Keeping these inside the planning cone is vital, even when leadership resists the narrative. We populate these lanes using probabilistic tools like Monte Carlo simulations, which run thousands of randomized permutations to test how capital allocation decisions hold up. The cone of plausibility shifts an organization away from passively guessing a single future and toward actively preparing for a rigorous spectrum of valid outcomes. However, the mathematical architecture of the cone becomes useless if its outputs are communicated to decision-makers using absolute language. This brings us back to epistemic modality. The linguistic markers we choose, our verbs, adverbs, and modal auxiliaries, must function as external confidence scores. Look at the cone of plausibility mapped with language. For the dense central baseline, we apply a strong modality lexicon. Analysts should use highly assertive tags like is poised to, undoubtedly, and certainly to signal high statistical density. Moving to the alternative scenarios layer, the vocabulary must downshift. We map an intermediate modality here, strictly utilizing terms like could well see, probably, or likely. For the outer wildcard edges, we apply a weak modality lexicon. Language here must convey strict contingency, utilizing markers like may potentially, might, or possibly. Violating this structure creates a severe hazard known as the certainty trap. Using strong epistemic modality to describe a low probability wildcard scenario generates false confidence and misdirects capital. Strict adherence to this linguistic mapping bridges the gap between the analyst and the executive. It precisely calibrates boardroom expectations to the mathematical reality. Without epistemic integrity in our language, even a 10,000 iteration Monte Carlo simulation will be misinterpreted. The resulting intelligence remains actionable but highly dangerous. This illustrates a common failure point: content-oriented hedging. Analysts use phrases like I think or I hope to cushion predictions and avoid personal accountability. This subjective language strips the forecast of its utility. It shifts the epistemic burden away from the hard data and onto the forecaster's personal state. This creates an immediate, severe strategic vulnerability for the entire organization. The solution is a strict rule of depersonalizing the projection. The syntactic subject of any forecast must always be the data architecture itself, the indicators, the yield curves, the models, never the individual analyst. Next, organizations must apply the conditionality pivot. Outer cone forecasts should be structured as strict if-then conditional logic, explicitly tying the predicted outcome to specific market triggers. Modern machine learning ecosystems then ingest unstructured data, from regulatory filings to supply chain metrics, to continuously update these if-then trigger probabilities. By removing human ego and static assumptions from the presentation of the data, the organization insulates itself from recency bias and the volatility of narrative-driven forecasting. Ultimately, mastering the market is about more than guessing a singular future. Scenario analysis and probabilistic forecasting map uncertainty to provide decision-makers a clear view of the terrain ahead. To achieve this, modern organizations face a dual mandate. They must pair the intense quantitative rigor of the cone of plausibility with the strict qualitative precision of epistemic modality. This synthesis elevates forecasting, transitioning it from a rigid, spreadsheet-based accounting exercise into a continuously adaptive intelligence ecosystem. The objective is no longer to bet everything on being right about one outcome. It is about building the institutional capacity to operate with resilience, clarity, and adaptability across all plausible futures.